This week, I am thrilled to be joined once again by breathing specialist Barbara Tanze to challenge some of the assumptions we might have about breathing for singing, airflow, and pressure. We explore what the science can tell us right now, as well as what we don't quite know yet, and whether the experiences we actually have when we're singing and breathing for singing reflect what our bodies are actually doing. Plus, Barbara introduces us to her Flexiflow, a fascinating tool designed to make the invisible relationship of airflow, pressure, and the vocal folds something that singers can actually hear and touch. So, should we be teaching singers how to breathe? Or could we be trusting the brain's organization of things a little bit more? Barbara Tanze, we need you! Barbara, welcome back!
Yeah, I'm so glad to be here with you, especially after we have met in person and felt the chemistry.
Well, the first time we chatted was in 2022, and we were talking about discovering optimal breathing. But now, with everything that you have filled the last 4 years with, how have your thoughts on functional breathing for singing changed, and what has stayed constant?
Well, for the most part, I just realized that there's so much that I don't know. And I just have so many more questions because diving deeper into that subject just reveals how complex it really is, right? Breathing is one of those things that when you don't think about it, it seems completely self-explanatory. Who needs to think about breathing? We breathe every day. Nobody needs to think about it. And then you start thinking about it, and then you realize, oh my God, there's so much to it if you actually want to understand, especially for singing, what is happening when we're breathing. And there's so much that we still just don't know. And that's exciting.
You're embarking on a PhD very soon, and you're exploring expiratory pressure regulation, biomechanics, mental models, and inquiry-based vocal pedagogy. Quite the title.
That sounds scary. It seemed like a good idea.
Well, what made you want to do a PhD?
I felt that those questions that I have really gathered over the last few years, I felt like either I'm going to wait for somebody else to answer those questions, or I try to find at least a tiny little bit of the answers myself. And that motivated me. That, and of course, the incredible support of people at the university who gave me the possibility to do that, because without them, it wouldn't have happened. So I think it's kind of a lucky coincidences, lucky collaboration with people who are just as enthusiastic about this as I am. And so I have a good feeling that we might get one little step closer to getting a couple of answers.
Can you just bring us up to speed on what we do know about the body pressure and airflow?
Okay, I do think that we know quite a lot about the physics, all the stuff that I'm not really interested in because physics is really not my thing. But we know a lot about the physics. So I think people like Tanze, people like also Sundberg, there have been real big progresses made in that field. And when it comes to all of the muscles that are doing things, we also know certain things. There has been research trying to use electromyograms, so EMG, on different layers of muscles. There have been studies done trying to at least understand a little bit more what the diaphragm is doing, using ultrasound, using even pressurized balloons inserted into the stomach of people. Though, yeah, that research was done in the 60s. I don't know if like ethically we could still do that today. So there has been research about this. And so we do know that certain muscles are doing something, and we know for very limited cases what they are doing. But we don't have more broad or more quantitative research how that works for many, many people, because it's quite a time-consuming process. You know, you need to do the EMG, you have to do the ultrasound, you have to make the people sing exactly the same thing. You need specific machines, you need people who can use those machines, who know how to interpret the results of the machines. It's just a lot of work. And I think that there's also not a lot of money in singing research because it's generally not something that is being funded by big pharmaceutical companies or other entities, because it's for us, it's not a niche because we're living in that world. But generally seen, it's quite a niche, and breathing is being treated quite badly by research as a whole. It has become a little bit better over the last, let's say, 10 years. Since COVID, actually, a lot has happened in the just breathing research, but like breathing for singing is an under category of that. Underfunding makes for not much research, which is why I think it's a good way to do this for a PhD, because at least I hope that I will have all of those things at my disposal, the things and the people who can then work with me. So what we do know is just certain muscles, what they are doing and how they do react to that pressure. We don't know a lot about the diaphragm because it's so difficult. Even with ultrasound, you cannot measure the actual muscle activity, right? You can just see like where the muscle is in space. You cannot measure actually what's happening inside the muscle fiber. You do not know whether there's isotonic, isometric contraction. So there's a lot that we don't know. And yet people are just talking so much about what the diaphragm is doing in singing, right? And I find that really interesting.
What burning questions are you hoping to get a little bit more clarity on?
Ooh. First of all, disclaimer, I think that there's going to be even more questions after I'm done with this, but the questions I would really like to at least get into and maybe open the field for others also to is how singers visualize within their own body how everything is working together, especially when it comes to that expiratory pressure regulation, or in normal words, not so fancy words like breath support or appoggio, because the way that we conceptualize or visualize what's happening inside our body is not necessarily what's actually happening inside our body. Because especially when we're teaching it, we very often rely on things that we feel, our own sensory feedback, and then we verbalize that and we tell our students, this is how it should be, or this is what you should do because this is how it feels for us. But what if what we think is happening inside our body is not actually happening the way that we think? But then we try to teach that to students who have different sensory feedback, a different way of communicating, maybe different way of understanding words, and different way of just in their body physically implementing things. So that's my question. How congruent is that? The visualization of the singer, of what's happening inside them and what's actually happening inside them.
What are some of the common expiratory behavioral challenges that you have seen singers experience across genre?
Yeah, so I think there are like two big schools or two big fields there. It's the don't do anything at all, don't think about it, just let it do whatever it needs. And then singers might be very surprised by things that their body is doing. And then you have the whole field of micromanaging specific muscles, like squeeze this, hold that, do it with your pelvic floor, sing from your diaphragm, all that kind of stuff. And I think in that micromanaging field, what is often happening is that people are really confused. And then because they are trying to micromanage specific muscles or specific parts of their body, some of which cannot be micromanaged as much, like the diaphragm, those people get a little overcompensating on things. For example, if you tell them that they should squeeze their diaphragm or squeeze their pelvic floor, what they're probably going to squeeze or going to do is to work with their abs or those kind of larger, more consciously controlled muscles. And that, of course, then has the effect that there's going to be less flexibility inside the entire system, because we have one actor, like, for example, let's talk about the transverse abdominis, because that's one of the muscles that many people are talking about. If we start to focus a lot on that one and we kind of try to hold that or squeeze that or do something with it, that means that all of the other muscles around that are also part of the system, but that maybe we do not address by name or just by concept, they will have to compensate. They will have to then maybe work in a different way, and that can throw off the entire system. So I don't know what's better. Is it better to just not talk about it, or is it better to micromanage? Probably different things work very well for different people. We're different. And I mean, if those directions didn't have any success, then they wouldn't have been there for such a long time. I'm just kind of trying to think, hey, what if there's like a middle way? What if there's a possibility to help brains organize that, because we start to understand the concept, but not the concept as squeeze something, hold that, and or hold your ribs open, but the concept of, hey, we need to somehow create circumstances or create a pressure inside our rib cage beneath the vocal folds that are beneficial to the vocal folds work.
We've heard terms like you mentioned before about breath support, and we know that pedagogues like Janice Chapman talk about the diamond of support. There are teachers who talk about getting into a pair of skinny jeans straight from the laundry to activate that transverse abdominis to lead the exhale. Many, many strategies. But we also know how individual singing is. Typically speaking, what would we expect from muscles in the body on a general scale?
So when we're exhaling without making a sound, there shouldn't actually be a lot of musculatory activity at all. So sitting like we are sitting right now, if we just take an inhale and then we just let that go, that's just relaxing. Diaphragm relaxing, intercostals relaxing. So that makes breathing such an amazingly efficient thing. It doesn't cost us a lot of energy. It costs us a tiny little bit of energy for the inhale, and then the exhale is basically passive, is what has been said many times. Now, that changes when the exhale becomes faster. So if we need to move a bigger volume of air, then we will have to start activating some muscles that help us exhale a little bit faster. And those are the muscles that are attached to the rib cage, like here in the lower part of the rib cage, or the muscles that can kind of squeeze the ribs together, because that of course creates more pressure inside the lungs and helps us exhale faster. So we can also do that together. So we can inhale and then we try to just exhale like really fast. Right? So we feel that things are starting to work. The internal intercostals, the different layers of the abdominal muscles, it could be also the latissimus dorsi. Many, many muscles actually participate in that. Now, when we make a sound or when we have an exhalation it goes against a resistance, which in the example of the sound are the vocal folds. But of course we can, for example, also do that with our lips, and we can like pretend to play the trumpet. And so when we exhale like this, which we can also all try, let's inhale and then do Zoom is asking me if I'm playing music. No, thank you. So if you compare that, like the quick exhale like this, or the resisted exhale like that, it may be very similar structures that are participating in that, but they're probably working in a slightly different way. So instead of just going into like a contraction and just trying to push everything out, there has to be a balance between how much pressure do we actually need to generate and how much do we need to also counteract that. And it's really fascinating how many muscles are participating in that, and how then we can understand that so many very smart people have come up with so many different concepts or so many different ideas of how that is functioning and which muscles are the ones working. Because we maybe all focus on slightly different parts of our body, slightly different muscles. And so now the question is just, how can I be sure, if I'm a singing teacher, that the person in front of me actually understands what I'm talking about when I talk about those concepts.
The way you just explained it there is a great way for us to introduce it in the studio, isn't it? It's like actually getting the person to feel what it's like unvoiced and then voiced, and having that experience before the explaining happens, as well as people like Ian Howell have talked about, is very useful. So when we start putting in things like lyrics or considering the features of certain material, like a classical piece compared to a contemporary musical theatre legit piece compared to a pop piece where the breath demands are different. It's very task specific, isn't it, breathing? How could we do that with this similar exercise?
Yeah, so what we did now is basically we used our lips as kind of vocal folds, right? Doing this. Now, if we move the source of vibration inside our body, so if we start to use our vocal folds, then this, of course, also activates a whole other system that's above the vocal folds, which is the whole resonator, the rest of the vocal tract, like the pharynx, the mouth, the articulators, all of that kind of things. And that, of course, adds another layer of complexity, which is one that I hopefully will not have to deal with too much. Like people, like you just said, for example, Ian Howell, Ken Bozeman, they're doing this beautifully, doing the acoustics and all of that kind of things. I'm more interested in what's happening below. So if now we have that pressure that's happening underneath the vocal folds are the ones that basically, by closing, by adducting, by starting to create a sound, are telling the body how much pressure is needed if we want to continue with that, if we want to have that kept stable. This, of course, is influenced also by everything that's above. So if you're talking about, for example, let's say the difference between twang and a classical sound, because those are very distinct, like resonances that I think people can really understand easily. So if I make a classical sound, something like something like this, my vocal tract, so my resonators are shaped in a specific way. And that, of course, also creates a specific pressure, also down onto the vocal folds. So that needs to be kind of mirrored by whatever pressure is generated or regulated underneath, so that the vocal folds themselves can just continue to vibrate as steadily as possible. Because if those two pressures are not well balanced, and I'm saying balanced like this because of course they're not completely balanced, right? We always need to have more pressure underneath to create the direction of the sound that goes out. But if I want my vocal folds to be able to vibrate in peace, I say, like just, chill, then I need to keep those two pressures as close to each other as possible. And my theory, my hypothesis is that our brain is very good at organizing that. Sometimes it just takes a little bit more time because it's very complex. It's not something that we do every day, especially if we start singing at a later age, or, or if we have specific conditions that make it more difficult for our body to balance those things out. But if we want to balance those pressures in classical, it's going to be slightly different than if I do like a twang sound. If I make a sound that is much more narrow above, so there's probably like more pressure generated up above the vocal folds, then my body needs to deal with that in a slightly different way than a sound like this. And I don't know if I would say that this means that we need to breathe differently. I think mostly that the body needs to be flexible enough, and also our concept of what the body needs to do needs to be flexible enough to be able to tolerate all of those different setups, right? And to be able to adapt to them, so that we don't like push a setup here. Like if we say, okay, I have setup 1, 2, and 3, like ribs really open, ribs really closed, or like floppy flop flop. I have 1, 2, or 3, and I don't push that setup then on the vocal folds. But because there's so much in between, and it's actually all about that in between and about all those subtle changes that our body makes all the time in order to keep that airflow really stable, in order so the vocal folds can work without being recruited as stabilizers.
Hi, it's Lynn here, popping by with a free resource. If you're a singer who wants to teach but sometimes feels a little unsure or overwhelmed, I've put together some free resources to help you feel grounded and supported as you take your next steps. Just check the link in the podcast description and you'll get an informed, practical PDF guide to help you get started, plus a few follow-up resources to help you feel less of a fraud and more confident in your teaching journey.
I think everything that you were just saying there really speaks to some of the things that are coming out in some of the research and articles that we might come across. So, for example, Heidi Moss Erickson has a paper called A Copernican Shift, reframing how we think about breath in singing. And to quote a little bit from that paper, she says, when we pay more attention to what the brain cares about when it comes to breath, rather than the act of breathing itself, we gain greater insight to address the challenges and create solutions to overcome them. Equally, I think there's some talk coming out at the minute, or maybe I've just missed the conversations that were happening before, about where breath sort of comes in the hierarchy of vocal training. It seems sometimes we go to breath as like the first thing, even though we know that what's happening maybe upstream is impacting the way the breath reacts to that. So as somebody who is very much in this world of breathing and body and the research side of this, what's your view on where it comes in vocal training?
Yeah, that's one of those questions again that I don't think that there is a general answer to it, because it really depends again on the individual singer. I can speak for myself. I used to be very much the breath first person because I was in a method that was teaching that. And I don't think that it was bad. I just think that you need to start somewhere. And anything can be a good way in if the nervous system of the singer is ready for that. That being said, if there are really like breathing dysfunctions, or if the singer comes to me because of questions about breathing, I would of course address that first, because that's why that person came to me. But if a person comes to me and wants to just sing, then of course we'll sing and we will just look at breathing from that perspective. And if there's an issue with breathing, then usually that person will notice it themselves. I see my work as then a bit like a detective or like a researcher. We kind of work together to kind of try to understand, okay, what is it that can make your voice really like fulfill its entire potential? And usually, if we are going on that kind of a journey, breath will come in at a certain point, not always in the same way, not always in the sense of you should breathe like this or breathing correctly looks like that. I'm really allergic to that. But sometimes it's just a part of something else, you know? I mean, you can't sing without breathing. While you're singing, breath is always going to be there. If we need to focus on it or not depends on many different factors. And I would say that the nervous system is the first one. Nervous system and wishes of the individual person. Breathing is just an amazing way that our nervous system communicates with us and that we can communicate with our nervous system. And of course, our voice is also part of that breathing system. So also our voice will always communicate the state of our nervous system. And we can somehow communicate also by using sound with our nervous system. Breath and voice are not always separable in that sense. So sometimes what is needed is to do breathing exercises, not because of the voice, but because of the nervous system, maybe. You know, that a person comes in, is really, really nervous to sing in front of you because maybe they've never done that before. So maybe it can be cool to just take a couple of like exhales and just signalate to the nervous system that we are safe. It's okay. We're feeling excited, but we're kind of safe. And sometimes that takes a long time so that then we can start to sing. Or sometimes people come in and they're like, I want to sing and I want to go and blah, 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 blah. And you can, of course, hear that their breathing is not as functional as would be good for them. But if they really come in and they really want to sing, let them sing. And then let's go discover where breath then has its place in that journey.
I kind of think of you now, Barbara, as the balloon lady. You have many.
I have many. When I go to different countries and I go to the supermarket and they have different kinds of balloons, I get very excited. So I went to Greece this year, and at the supermarket they had those kind of balloons, which I've never seen here. Like, they're huge. So of course I had to buy them.
You can open your own balloon museum.
Oh, Jesus, don't give me ideas.
Well, there's something that you showed us in Slovenia that was a way for us to experience the way in which our own bodies feel the pressure. Can you show that to us now?
Of course I can, because I'm totally prepared. I have balloons in all shapes and sizes. I don't remember how, but I kind of started to use balloons to kind of help people understand what parts of their body they're using in order to regulate pressure, to create pressure by just inflating a balloon. So very often I just tell my students, hey, can you blow up a balloon? And then we get, the balloon flying around.
Farting away.
And farting. And it's usually, or just that is so much fun that people, even people who are nervous or, who are a bit apprehensive, or who are, when it's people who have issues with their voice, the balloon usually brings a little bit of smiling, a little bit of like not thinking so much about the voice. And that's in itself, nervous system wise, just amazing. So what we can do with that balloon is not even then inflate it completely, but to just find that point of resistance. Kind of try to understand how that feels when we just want to kind of stretch it out a little bit. And we feel certain things activating. You can maybe also see the larynx moving up and down a little bit while we're doing that. And so the information that it gives to the student and to me is what their brain focuses on first. Like, what's the thing that they feel first? And sometimes that can be around here, it can be around the larynx, it can be around the abdominal muscles, it can be in the back, it can be really lots of places. I've had so many very surprising answers. Like, when I ask questions, they are not trick questions, or they're not questions where I want to get to a specific answer. I'm genuinely curious about what people are going to say, because it adds to my repertoire of n equals whatever I've already done plus one. And so that's just to kind of start to feel, oh, how is my body dealing with pressure? If I need to bring a little bit more air into the balloon to kind of stretch a little bit, what does my body do? Does it even close the vocal folds and then only send air like from the pharynx into the balloon? Yeah, that's possible. And I didn't know it was, but it's very revelatory to work with people. Like, you can do things only from here and push air here. Or you can actually like try to exhale into the balloon and create that one pressurized chamber between the balloon and your lungs.
Does this also speak to the idea of absorption?
It absolutely does. Yeah, absorption is that kind of concept that was created by Robin de Haas in MDH breathing coordination, that the rib cage kind of absorbs a certain amount of pressure. Yes, I mean, that's part of the questions that I have. What is actually happening there? What muscles are participating? What are the structures? How are they moving, right? So yes, and in a way, the balloon is absorbing and the rib cage is absorbing. And we have that. And then we have also creating a certain amount of pressure. Because if we only exhale like into the balloon and we don't activate anything, the balloon will stay quite floppy because we have quite a resistance here that if we want to go against that, if we want to push air into that, we need to use some tension. And tension is not always negative. It's just, we need to activate muscles, create muscle tension.
My experience with this one is I could absolutely feel the ribs expand, and I felt the lower abdominals be reactive. But I also noticed, because you've got the visual here, that my jaw, my face wanted to maybe become a little bit activated. And I know that's an area where I feel works a little unnecessarily when I sing. And so that was actually quite interesting doing this exercise, and also in Slovenia, that actually it tends to also come from a jaw perspective. If you were noticing that in a singer, would you be directing them to the sort of the rib cage rather than the face? Or is it a case of the jaw is the way that you regulate pressure and that's okay? Are there rights and wrongs, let's say, in bunny ears?
I don't really think that there are absolutes in rights and wrongs. And that's why I would always go into an exploration with this. For example, some people have such activity in the jaw that they can't even really get any air into the balloon. Because for them, like having to create pressure closes everything here. And so what we would do then, I would say, okay, that's cool. And then I'm like, okay, now can we try something else? Sometimes it's as simple as, can you not do that? Now you showed me that you can do that, and that's great, because maybe it'll come in handy one day. And then let's try if you can do it without that. Because if there's one thing that I really believe, and that I would be very sad if I was proven wrong, then it is that it's really a mix of all of those different structures, and that every person has a slightly different mix of collaboration of all of that, of all of those muscles. Because, just in one person already, maybe one side of my jaw muscles is a little bit more trained than the other. Maybe I chew more on one side. I once had a singer that had a tooth missing, and she felt like it wasn't necessary to replace it because it wasn't visible. But of course, she wasn't chewing on that side anymore, almost at all. And that created a huge disbalance in her jaw. You see, like there are so many different things. So I would never say this is right or this is wrong. I would always just say, hey, cool, now we know that we can do it this way, but can we do it in another way? Can we do it the opposite way? If it's a yes or no thing, like, am I using that muscle? Can I do it without using that muscle? And the answer can be yes or no. Or the answer can be, I don't know yet, because I need to wrap my head around it, quite literally. I need my brain to kind of understand that there are different strategies, because sometimes we just have automatized ways of doing certain things. It doesn't mean that it's the only way to do it. It just means that this is what my brain, my nervous system, my motor control system has automatized over years and years and years of maybe not questioning that.
When I first started teaching, it used to freak me out if the singer replied back to me that, oh, that feels hard, or that feels challenging, that feels difficult. And I think in my head, I'd be like, well, I've got to change it immediately. Now I've come to realize that it's new. Of course it might be challenging. The brain has no way of necessarily knowing how to deal with that yet, because it hasn't consciously experienced or whatever. I'm not a neuroscientist. I wish I was.
Oh, I will also never be a neuroscientist, but I find that super fascinating. And I'm so happy that there is more and more research emerging about this, because without understanding at least like basic levels of the brain, all of this, how are we going to understand all of this? Because the brain is what organizes it.
Well, you have added some new additions to your family. We've got the balloon 2.0. Flexiflow, and also a cat, a new little furball. How's the cat settling in?
Oh, the cat's fine. Yeah, he's probably sleeping somewhere because it's hot. He's very, very cute. And I mean, kittens are always very, very cute. So first of all, when I was doing the balloon thingy for the pressure, I realized that balloons have one very, very big issue, and that is that at a certain point they're full And then you have to let the air out and then you have to start all over. So I started to cut holes into balloons. And so we could sing into balloons, and that was cool. Well, we were also singing into balloons with no holes, which can be also very interesting. It just needs, like, disclaimer again before everybody goes and tries that. It needs a quite high degree of understanding pressure so that you don't maybe do something to your vocal folds. There's no research on this, and so I would err on the side of caution when doing this. So only do this with a person who knows what they're doing. So holds and balloons, singing into balloons, and then in 2020, I met Oren Boder, who also developed an SOVT straw and all those kind of things. And we had many discussions about pressure, and it was a lot of fun. And so we ended up kind of creating something that was like a precursor of the Flexiflow that exists now. And we had it patented, and it was all very fancy. And so this Flexiflow, what it does, because if I just have a hole, you can't really hear anything. It gives you a little bit of feedback, but there's no sound. When the Flexiflow is in, you have the sound that gives you like immediate auditive feedback of how much air is going through the balloon. And you can do that by just exhaling into it, quite strong exhale, or much slower exhale. Or, of course, you can do that with sound. You can have, or you can have, depending on the adduction of your vocal folds. And this is where it gets really interesting, because sometimes when we sing phrases like that go up or down, or like long phrases, our body might not upkeep the regulation for like the entire phrase. It might kind of give up a little bit early, or it might not have figured out at all how to just keep everything steady. So for that, this has proven to be quite amazing. I'm surprised every time I work with somebody, and instead of trying to explain and trying to use a lot of words that then come into another person's brain, and the person's like, what? But doesn't dare to say, oh, what? But says, yes, 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 and then does whatever. I have found that with this, it's kind of like a shortcut, and I don't need to use so many words, and I can actually ask the person to kind of describe what they are feeling. And so they create their own concept and their own way of verbalizing that, instead of me verbalizing it for them and then them translating it to what makes sense to them. And it's kind of like how do you call that in English? The silent telephone. It's a game where you like whisper into a person's ear, like the first person has like a sentence and you whisper it into another person's ear, and so on and so on. In the end, usually something completely comes out, right?
Yeah, yeah. Would you consider this an SOVT?
It can be. It can be when we do something like when we put so much air into the balloon that we have some sort of restriction from this. When we do something like and the balloon stays floppy, it's not really an SOVT because it doesn't really occlude anything, right? Like the air comes out so slowly or like in such small volume that it doesn't even inflate the balloon. It just goes straight through. So I wouldn't say in most cases that it is an SOVT, but I'm very happy to be proven wrong by somebody who knows how to measure that. Maybe it is.
I was wondering about intraoral pressures, and if we think about SOVTs on a scale of low intraoral pressure to high intraoral pressure, we might find that like a hum is on the lower end of the scale. Something like a trill, tongue trill might be somewhere in the middle, and a straw deep in water might give us the highest, let's say. How interchangeable is the oral pressure that this builds?
That's a very good question. I think it just gives you feedback as to how much air comes out. So that means that if you use anything inside your mouth, that would make for like an SOVT. Like you could probably do like a and then use the balloon with that. It will just tell you how much air comes through that occlusion and with how much pressure. Like I would call it a magnifying glass. It's a magnifying glass that helps us see, hear, and kind of touch what is the invisible things that we don't know. Because like if I do, I don't know exactly the adduction of my vocal folds. Like, of course, if I do it a lot, like, that, yes. But if I do this, this gives me much more precise information, and I can also go from one to the other in like one fluent movement. And that's another thing that if one day somebody is going to do research on the Flexiflow, and I think that shouldn't be me, I think it should be somebody who's neutral and objective, then those would be the kind of questions that I would have. Like, hey, how exact is the level of adduction with what I hear in the balloon? All I've done so far is just some endoscopic images. So I filmed my vocal folds while using the Flexiflow. So I have a couple of ideas or things that have been confirmed, like ideas that I've had that were confirmed by those images. But I would never pretend to be an expert on evaluating endoscopic imagery or something like this. So this would have to be a person who is much more used to doing that kind of thing.
It was really interesting seeing that endoscopic video that you shared with us, because it seemed like it was a great way to help the singer let go of their throat and not kind of squeeze everything in. And you also mentioned how this might actually be a really useful tool for singers who have MTD.
Yeah, I've used it with several singers who have muscle tension dysphonia, also people who have just issues in adduction. So like this can be like pressed phonation, too much adduction, or not enough adduction, because of course, usually that is a complex issue. It's not just the adduction. It's like, why is this happening and what's happening around it? And so by hearing the air, you basically give a very clear parameter to your brain that's like, oh, I didn't even realize that so much air was coming out. Or I didn't realize I wasn't actually exhaling enough, creating enough pressure. And so it's just a way, like an external hint that gives information to the brain. And then I let my brain organize according to what I would like. So if I have somebody who does this and has like a really pressed tone like that, then I can be like, hey, how about let's try if we could hear some air coming through the balloon. Can you do this? And usually, because it's so simple, it's such a simple thing to do, the brain usually is like, oh, of course we can make the air audible. But if I told the person, can you please adduct your vocal folds less? Or like, can you open your vocal folds more? That's very complex as an instruction, because usually, especially if we're talking about singers who haven't done like 30 years of working with all those internal structures, usually those structures, they don't behave like that you're just like, okay, now squeeze and now open. But there's not that kind of connection. So we need something that it is external to us to give information to the brain as to what we want from it.
I'm just pressing the pause button on the podcast for a very brief moment to invite you to book your free BAST call. If you've been thinking about joining the BAST community through one of our courses, but you just don't know which option is the best for you, then why not book your free Zoom chat with our very own Kimberly George, who has all the answers. Head over to basttraining.com/book-a-call/ and click that big blue button. That's basttraining.com/book-a-call/. Now, where were we?
something that I have always thought I was doing when singing in my higher range is not having enough airflow. I always feel like something was a little bit stinted or being valved out. And then when I've been trying it through the Flexiflow, which I am slightly obsessed with since getting one, is the fact that the balloon would deflate for me as I got up to the top. And I was like, well, I think that sort of plays into what I was thinking I was doing. So if it's deflating, there's not as much air going into the balloon, and therefore could that actually be supporting what I think I was doing anyway?
It could. It's not necessarily wrong, but again, we're going into the can you do it in a different way? Because there's nothing wrong with me going, ooh, okay? Because maybe I use more twang, on the higher note, and that just creates a different kind of pressure. And so the vocal folds close more. That's fine. Yeah. But the question is that the only thing our body knows how to do and our brain knows how to organize? Can it also create that siren with the same kind of adduction? It's all about trying many, many, many different things and doing them the way that requires the least amount of effort and energy, so that basically everything can be as chill as possible. I just tell the singers, look, all we want is for you to be as chill as possible and everything just sound fabulous. So, and as chill as possible can sometimes still be quite active, but we're talking relative here.
Can it be used to help in belting? Like, for example, if somebody is usually quite thickly dominant, M1 dominant, chest dominant, whatever you want to call it, and they want that fullness, but when they do it through the Flexiflow, it flips them.
Yes, and it will do that very often. So usually what I work with them then is to start with a little bit less adduction on like the lower notes. So instead of doing something like this, we would go into, okay, can we hear a little bit of air? And then go up and try to not have so much air anymore. It's about giving yourself and your vocal folds and your brain a lot of different possibilities and options. Because if you're really like into this very heavy M1 kind of sound like here, then for your brain that's like, oh cool, that feels safe, but at a certain point going up, maybe it doesn't feel so safe anymore. And that means that we need to create the possibility for those vocal folds to feel safe also when there's a little bit less vocal fold mass, when there's maybe a little bit less adduction, right? And so kind of start playing with that and just exploring different kinds of sounds with different kinds of airflow.
What are some typical results that singers are reporting to you after using the Flexiflow?
Usually what they say is, oh, I understand everything so much better, which is amazing because that is exactly what I wanted. And I think they feel much more in control, but not in the sense of I need to control my voice, but they feel much more in like a chill way of control because of that understanding. And that's exactly what I think is really, really important for a singer. It's not the exercise, it's not the style or whatever. It's about understanding the flexibility of the system and how we can adapt to all sorts of different things. And yes, of course, as an opera singer, we're going to then go and specialize maybe in a specific kind of coordination. Or as a musical theater singer, you're going to specialize in a specific kind of coordination. As a jazz singer, as whatever. But that doesn't mean that you can't also create all sorts of different sounds, which means that you have the entire range of motion that's possible for your vocal folds, for everything that's around your vocal folds, for your resonance. just because you're specialized in something doesn't mean that you need to get stuck in that and that you need to get unflexible with it.
Where can people actually buy a Flexiflow?
On my website. Right now, it's only on my website. We produce everything completely locally. Basically, I'm doing most of the things right now here. So it's kind of like an Etsy thing. It's like crafts, punching holes into the balloons and 3D printing the flexis and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I'm not doing it personally, but I'm ordering the fabric and bringing it to the seamstress for the little bags. And it's like that right now. We ship worldwide except to the US because it's impossible to send things to the US right now from European countries because of the tariffs and because postal services kind of refuse because they just don't know how much it would cost and they don't want stuff to be sent back. And so they don't send anything to the US. But yeah, we've had funny go-arounds for people in the US, you know, having things sent to somewhere in Europe and then the person coming to the US and bringing them the flexi, or friends in Canada. So it's unfortunate, but that's the situation that we have right now. I don't have the time right now to develop the business side of this to a degree where this becomes a multinational kind of thing. So it's very much, you order a Flexiflow on my website and I'll wrap it and I'll put it in an envelope and I'll take it to the post office.
Amazing. It's all very, very personal, isn't it? When you're doing
And
it.
it's all local, and it's all like the balloons that we add to the flexible packs are biodegradable. The fabric is eco fabric. It's done, like I said, by a seamstress in my village. So it's like, it's really important for me to not exploit anybody on the way to this. So that maybe is reflected in the price. But, you know, I think that when you think about the voice and how you do not need to invest in buying an instrument, like a violinist has to usually spend a lot of money on a high quality violin. I think this is just money that you invest into your voice so that it can be its absolute best and healthiest, and so you can use it for your entire life.
And just so we know, we can reuse the Flexiflow, the bits. Is it just a case of antibacterial wipe? Do you have to do any special sterilization?
I usually spray it with just some antibacterial spray. We cannot boil them, unfortunately, because they are 3D printed and they're a bit porous, and so the color changes. Color changes also throughout time, I have noticed. They fade a little bit. Here you can see how it looks when it's not in the balloon. So basically, I usually just spray it down and I let it dry. Then you can just insert it into other balloons. I have one in this really big balloon. You can, of course, use whatever balloons you want. You just have to cut a little hole into them and then somehow fidget the Flexiflow into the balloon. I have found out many years after by a student that the best way is to kind of have it standing on a table, stretch the hole in the balloon and kind of like put it on top of it. And something else that you can do, and I'm going to do it without the balloon now, is the flexi is also made so that it fits a 1 centimeter diameter straw. So you can also use it with a straw. So what you can do is to put the straw onto the Flexiflow inside the balloon, and then you really do have an SOVT. You get all the benefits of the straw, and you kind of squeeze the balloon a little bit. You get all the benefits of the straw, plus you get the magnifying effect of the balloon. And this is also really important for people who have latex allergies, because it's impossible to get this kind of balloons that are not latex. And people who can't use their hands. I'm working with tetraplegic people who they can't hold something. And so it's much easier to give them a straw. It's much easier for them to stabilize the balloon. I would cut the straw then a little bit. But yes, as you can see, it's a lot of learning by doing, trial and error. It's a lot of improvising, but I have found that the Flexiflow has really helped many people. And every time I see somebody with a Flexiflow somewhere or get some feedback, it just makes me incredibly happy that it can be helpful for other people.
Yeah, I bet. I'm really enjoying it at the moment and starting to bring it into lessons. So I'm really interested to see the more I use it, what's coming up, what are the patterns, and I love a prop.
If it serves its purpose, then
It's great.
why not?
Yeah. So other than your PhD, this tiny little project that you're about to go on to.
I'm blissfully completely oblivious as to how much it actually entails because I'm starting in October. Right now it's the excitement, and maybe very soon there's going to be the oh.
Yeah. Is there anything else in the pipeline for 2026? And what do you want to sort of do with the Flexiflow? Is there Flexiflow 3.0?
I don't know. I think right now my priority is going to be the research. I would really love at a certain point to have somebody look at the Flexiflow from a research point of view, because I think there are many things that I don't understand about it. I think there are many things that could still maybe be better or help people more, or just the understanding of how it works. Lots of questions right there. I would love to be able to send them to the US at a certain point again. So let's see how that develops. But that I cannot do that alone. And so it also really very much depends on the people around me and the people who would be interested in basically actually making this into an actual business.
So where can our listeners and our watchers keep up to date with you, follow you through your PhD work, and get in touch with you with any questions and experiences that they have?
Probably the best is on Instagram. I share most of my stuff on Instagram at BT Breathing. I also just created the .flexiflow profile on Instagram that people can follow. If they're interested in the Flexiflow, I'm going to now start just posting Flexiflow stuff to that profile and keep my profile more for the research and all those kind of things. So I think those two are probably the way to go. And of course, people can also book online sessions with me if they are interested in understanding more about all of those crazy pressure regulation things, and if they want to explore in a very open-minded way, explore what that kind of breath support actually means for them.
Barbara, it's always so lovely to chat with you, and thank you for your generosity coming on and talking about your projects and the information that you're obviously quite excited about. So as always, it's a pleasure, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much. As I said, I'm always just over the moon when somebody gives me any sort of feedback about the Flexiflow or anything that has helped them. So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to talk to you about it. And I hope that this is not our last conversation.
Oh, it won't be. Once I'm there, I'm like a leech.